We're going to be joined by Richard, who's going to be talking about the regulatory process. So QMS Consultancy helps medical device entrepreneurs to accelerate their route to market by providing the tools and understanding they need to meet their regulatory goals. So that's fantastic. So followed quite promptly after Richard is Nicola Broughton from CPI, who's going to be talking about the financial support that's available to companies to navigate that medical device regulation. And after Nicola, I'm going to be giving a bit of an overview of our recently established iiDiagnostics company. So I think most of our attendees are joined now, so I will hand over to you, Richard. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, great. Okay, so welcome everybody. Thank you very much for the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine for inviting me to speak today. My details are on the screen. You should be able to see a couple of lizards and a business card. The business card has got my email address on, and please do feel free to contact me if you need regulatory support. I do donate one day every week to giving free regulatory advice to startup businesses, universities, academics and clinicians who think they might be developing a medical device and need additional help. So please feel free to contact me and we can hook up on a Zoom call quite in the near future. So I wanted to just start with a little bit of an introduction to give you a background of what I do know and also what I don't know, so that you're all familiar with that. And I've now been working in the medical device industry for about 28 years. And that's been a variety of quality control, quality assurance and regulatory roles. And throughout the whole of that period, I was also working product design, design of the production process, design of the raw materials, and also design of the finished product. And ultimately, it led to me becoming promoted to QA and design manager. And that process was a little bit unexpected in the sense of it was QA and design manager, and I didn't have the bandwidth to do both roles. At the time, the quality department was a very parallel activity to manufacturing and development, and it was a full-time role. So what I did is I rewrote the quality management system and I integrated the quality management system with the rest of the processes in the company, so that the company managers and all the people were creating the records for the quality management system. And I was just rethinking how the quality management could be designed. And it worked so well, and we easily passed our notified body audits, that when the operations manager left a couple of years later, he said, would you build a quality management system for my new company? And I said I would. And then that kind of set me on a role then as a consultant. I've been consultant now since sort of unofficial 2013, officially 2014. I've helped over 50 companies and more than 70 products. A mix of products from a class 1 to class 3 medical devices, class A to class D for IVDs, custom-made orthopedic implants, software as a medical device. And my quality management system has passed its 81st notified body audit last week. So it's a fully sort of validated system that is doing really well for the businesses that I put it into. I've now reached a point, as I said at the sort of outset, that I'm able to give back a little bit. So I donate one day a week to startups. I'm an expert in residence at the Universities of Liverpool and Oxford, and I'm an honorary practice fellow at Imperial College London, where I do a couple of lectures every year. I'm also active in a number of hubs, and if you need me to help you with any regulatory help and guidance, then please do reach out to me on my email. So I was asked to speak about regulations and try and explain how regulations are, how basically medical device regulations are very complex, and I was asked to speak about the whole gambit of regulations. So I thought, well, how can I do this in a way that will make it simple and easy to work through? And most of you will probably have heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and it starts off with things like food and water, and then once you've got your basics of food and water, the next thing is safety in a home. Then you need friends and family, and then you need to feel good about yourself, and then you need self-actualization. So sort of thinking outside the box and trying to improve your own situation. So this is a well-known hierarchy, and I've come up with my own, Hall's hierarchy of regulations. So the foundational document or the foundational process is number 5, the quality management system, and then all the layers on top. I'm going to start with number 1 and tell you, first of all, who the legislators are that you'll need to interact with if you're putting a medical device on the market, and then I'll work the way through. So there was 5, but I've got to talk about Brexit. So Brexit is a 4th hierarchy. It does impact you now that we've got the UK CA mark, and I've just learned some new news on that today that I'll introduce as well. So to start with, then we're going to look at who the legislators are. Essentially, everywhere you go in the world, there will be a regulatory body preventing you from placing products on the market unless you've proven that your product is safe and effective. Now, for low risk devices, this can be done by self-declaring the product on the market. Essentially, it's just as easy as selling shoes. You just sell it on the market. For higher risk devices, you have to jump through a number of hoops and over a couple of hurdles. The regulatory bodies that deal with your regulated medical device will be different in every country. So you need to understand who are the regulators and what do they need before you can place the product on the market. Most people start with Europe, the UK and America, because between that group, that represents around about 70% of all medical device sales in the world. But your particular interest, your particular product might have its biggest market in Australia or Brazil. So don't be swayed to go straight to Europe if your biggest market is in Brazil. Think about where you want to go in the world. For the remainder of this video, I'm going to talk about Europe and the UK as a sort of central theme, and then that can then be used as a propagation for the whole of the world, really. Europe is the most complicated regulatory framework in the whole world. So if we start there and understand that, we've pretty much cracked the world understanding. So within this area of the world, there are 2 jurisdictions or 2 bodies which govern medical devices. We've got the competent authorities and notified bodies. The competent authorities audit the notified bodies. It's the notified body's job to go and audit the industry. If you take someone like BSI, if you look at their website, you'll see they've got 2 numbers next to their name, 86 and 2797. That means they've got 2 offices. They've got one in the UK, they've got one in Europe, which means they can do both UK CA marking and CE marking. It's the same with SGS. UL, to the best of my knowledge, aren't planning to go to Europe. And some of you may know we've lost Lloyd's Register and we've lost AMTAC as part of this tranche of new regulations that are coming in over the next few years, starting last year with the medical device regulation. It's put a lot of notified bodies off and they've dropped away from the market. There used to be 27 competent authorities. Now there's only, it used to be 28, now it's 27 in Europe. We've kept our competent authority, the MHRA. The MHRA oversees the notified bodies. In the UK, those are called UK approved bodies, and they're still called notified bodies in Europe. Within the UK, you can use European bodies to do this, notified bodies, to work with you to put your products on the market. But none of them at the moment are UK approved bodies. The audits I went through last week was with DECRA. DECRA are a European notified body, and they wanted to become a UK approved body. So they were being audited by, I can't remember, a UK government agency. I can't remember the name of it. And they were being audited while we were being audited. And they have to go through this process. And I think by the end of the year, there'll be a number of notified bodies you can choose from that are European based. So legislation then, what is the legislation you must meet? Well, I think it can be broken down into 3 categories. First of all, the regulations and directives. So across Europe for the last 20 plus years have been, or maybe up to as much as 30 years, there's been directives. There's the Medical Device Directive and the IVD Directive. Before that, actually, there was the Active Implantable Medical Device Directive. Now we've got regulations. The MDR has been published already last May, and the IVDR will be published in May this coming year. And we've got the UK MDR 2002. Now, all of these can be downloaded from the internet for free, so there's no problem in terms of getting hold of them, but you need to know what numbers they are. So I've given you the numbers on the screen. You get standards as well that govern industry, and these are known as state of the art. There's literally hundreds and hundreds of standards, and they are both ISO standards and IEC standards. Think of ISO standards as sort of assessing or laying down the law of a general scope of work, whereas the IEC is sort of a testing type standard, generally speaking. It's not always the case, but it's generally speaking that way. So it's ISO 13485, ISO 14971, it's IEC 62304 for the standard that deals with software. Now the ones in the middle line are the ones I've already mentioned, will be there in a lot of medical devices. You also have to think about specific medical standards which are specific to your medical device. So if you've got an X-ray machine, you have to meet the requirements of IEC 60601-2-44, and it's specific to your device. And as in industry, you need to determine which ones are specific to your device, and you must meet those minimum standards. You can overdo those standards, but you must meet those minimum standards. So how do you find the standards? Well, first of all, you need to know that they're paid for. You then need to know that perhaps the BSI sell them. You can also buy them from Eastern European countries for a lot cheaper, and you can probably get them from the university for free. So there's a number of ways you can get them. If you go to the BSI shop, you can search on there for the standards, and it will tell you if the standards are about to be revised, or if they are current, or if they're out of date. It's a really good website. I highly recommend it. You can also Google search terms, and then through Wikipedia and stuff, you can get a lot of knowledge about which standards you need to comply with. There's a ton of guidance documents as well in Europe. Guidance documents for the outdated directives are MedDevs, and there's still useful information in there. There's, I don't know, probably over 30 MedDevs been published. One of them, 2.7/1 Rev 4, is for clinical evaluations and writing a clinical evaluation report. That's not needed for IVDs, but it's needed for all medical devices. And under the regulation, it's even needed, you need a report in your technical file, even for a class 1, a low risk medical device. Now, under the regulation, we've got now a 300-page medical device regulation that's been published already. And to add to that volume of information, there's now 93 MDCG guidance documents that have been published, and there's another 30 odd are in the pipeline. The purpose of those are to explain certain parts of the regulation and to help you if you're confused about any subject within the regulation. So they're a really good source of information. It's where, if you just type in MDCG guidance documents to Google, you'll find the one that's applicable to you. So looking now at device scope and classification, this is probably the least well understood from the people I speak to, which are companies just starting off their journey. So this will be quite interesting for a lot of people, I would have thought. You need to consider what it is the device is going to do and what claims you make about the device, and that will set the classification of the device. So if we read at the top, it says any instrument, apparatus, appliance, software, implant, reagent material, or other article intended by the manufacturer to be used alone or in combination for human beings for one or more of the following specific medical purposes. And then it starts diagnosis, prevention, monitoring, prediction, prognosis, treatment, or alleviation of a disease, or diagnosis, monitoring, treatment, alleviation of, or compensation for an injury or disability, and it goes on. So the definition says, and this is the definition from the European MDR, and if you need to know, it's in Article 2. This says that it's for human beings, which means if you create a device and you sell it to the veterinary world, you don't need to meet the requirements of the regulation. It's not regulated in the same way as human beings would be, or a device for human beings. So a lot of companies will create a medical device for human beings, and then they will launch it in the veterinary world first to get clinical feedback, and then they can work out what does and doesn't work, and then act accordingly, make changes to the device, and then put it into the human clinical environment. It also says diagnosis, prevention of disease, diagnosis, monitoring of an injury or disability. So it will probably surprise a lot of people on the call today to realise that tampons and sanitary ware are not medical devices. At least they're not medical devices in Europe or the UK. They are considered medical devices in the US because the FDA decide that they are medical devices, and then they are. But the reason they're not medical devices is because having a menstrual cycle is not a disease and not a disability. So there's nothing in the definition that you can say that applies to tampons. Likewise, the muscle stimulation device, that's changing the physiology of a person, and the FDA think that that's good enough to call it a medical device. But in Europe, you cannot put the definition to the muscle stimulation device. If you create the muscle stimulation device and you put it on the market as an antidote to back pain, if you've got back pain, use this device and it'll ease your back pain, then it's covered by the medical device regulation, and suddenly you've got, because it's treating an injury by doing so, and because of that you can put it into the statement, therefore it's a medical device. Absorbent material put onto wounds, again, is a medical device because it's an injury and you are making the injury better. So it's a bit of a spot quiz now I want to do now. So imagine this patient on the left has an airborne disease, maybe he has COVID, who knows, and he's come in for an injection to make him better. What I want you to do is tell me, just in your heads, don't do it out loud, just tell me how many medical devices you can see in the foreground of this picture. So have a look and see which in the picture that is not clothing and not hair, anything else that you can see might be a medical device. And just count them up, and then I'm going to tell you what I think. So I'm going to give you a little clue, and there is a regulation, number 445, for protective, the PPE regulation for protecting individuals wearing things, and that's a clue into this this picture and the question really. So I can tell you that anyone that said the face mask the patient was wearing was a medical device got that right. The syringe is obviously a medical device. I think everybody would get that right. And the glove, if the glove is being used, because that nurse is injecting lots of people that day, and she's taking her gloves off in between as a way of stopping spreading a disease, again, that's a medical device because you are preventing a disease. So the face mask, the glove, they're both preventing a disease. The injection is that medical device doing the injection will be treating a disease. Now the face mask and the shield that the nurse is wearing, if she doesn't have COVID or an airborne disease, they are not medical devices. So what they are is protective equipment. So she's protecting herself from getting an airborne disease from the patient. She's wearing glasses as well. I don't know if anyone noticed that. The glasses could be a medical device. They could also not be. So if she's wearing glasses and they are, because she is short or long-sighted, then they're a medical device. If they're there to protect her eyes so she doesn't get splashed with blood or some airborne disease, then they are protective equipment. And if they're just a fashion accessory because she thinks she looks better with glasses on, then they're neither a medical device or a PPE piece of equipment. You could say the same about the lab coat. So there's a number of things in that picture which could be confusing, and it comes down to what the manufacturer says about the device. So the face mask could be exactly the same face mask sold for the protection of people from other people, excuse me, would be a PPE. But if you sell a face mask and you say on the face mask it's there to prevent you spreading a potential airborne disease, then it's a medical device. And different regulations have different standards and different levels that you must pass through, and some are easier than others. So it's important to think about what it is you're placing on market, and first of all, is it a medical device or could it be something else? Once you've determined that what you've got is probably a medical device, you've got to determine whether it's a medical device or an IVD. So I'm going to explain very clearly what an IVD is now. So a medical device is something that touches the body or analyzes the body directly, and an IVD analyzes cells and fluids taken from the body, and the analysis happens away from the body. It could happen in a lab hundreds of miles away, or it could happen in a device right next to the patient, but it doesn't happen on the patient. So if you think about an electrical device that's working away in a laboratory will have a different set of risks than an electrical device working away on a patient. And if that patient's very frail and they get electrocuted, the electrical device will kill them. If the device in the lab electrocutes someone, if they're fully healthy, it will be less serious. And because of this, they've got different risks. Because they've got different risks, the European nations have split them into different regulations. So it's important you need to know that it's a medical device or an IVD, because different regulations have different requirements and they have different classification. So I'm going to just labour this point a little bit more, and I want you to think which of these are IVDs and which you think are medical devices. So an easy starter for 10 is the one on the left, the diabetes monitor. It's analysing a drop of blood. So its intended purpose is in vitro diagnosis. Okay, so that's an IVD. The evac tubes are blood samples taken from a patient to be held for a period of time. And most people I speak to would consider those to be general laboratory equipment. They think of them as test tubes, and that's all they are. But the plastic and the biocompatibility and the interaction and the leaching of the plastic could have an impact on the blood, and then that blood is going to get analysed, so it has to be regulated. Now, because it's being analysed outside the body, the blood tubes are a IVD. You could store blood in a blood bag, and you then might think, well, then that makes the blood bag an IVD because it's being held outside the body. But in fact, the blood bag is a medical device, and that's because the intended use is the blood is going to be stored for a period of time, and then it's going to go into a human to make that person better. And so effectively, the plastic is touching that human, and so it's categorized as a medical device. Now, software, if there's anyone on the call today that are doing software, it was news to me only about 3 years ago that software could either be IVD or a medical device. I thought all software is a medical device, but it can be either, and I'll explain why. It can also be non-medical device software used in a medical setting as well. So I'll try and explain this. If you take a skin cell and you look at it under a microscope and you use software to highlight possible cancer on that biopsy slide, then the software doing the analysis is IVD software. If you use software to analyze cancer in a mammography scan, then that is medical device software, because the mammography scanner is medical device, and that makes the software medical device. One of my other companies, clients, if you like, Febris, it took a while to get a real good handle on what classification their device was. What they do is they take electronic information from other medical devices, they feed it through their app, which is standalone software, and then that app information can be sent from a small pop-up tent in the middle of India off to a big city where there's a doctor who can then send information back to send that child off to emergency care or send them home because he thinks they're okay or she thinks they're okay. Now, as part of that app, the Phoebus wanted to have a lookup table in the software and categorize the information in a health score. Now, the lookup table is something that's used throughout the country in the UK, and you might get this data and put it in, and it would, a piece of paper would say, oh, you're level 42 or you're level 31, and 31 might be more healthy than 42. And it was the use of that score that made that a medical device. Without the score, it's a non-medical device. It's no more a medical device than WhatsApp is or text. If you get some information from a medical device, you put it into your phone and you send it to a doctor using text, that text does not make your phone a medical device. So you can transmit medical device information, but it's the interpretation of that information which then turns that software into medical device software. I mentioned MDCG guidance documents before, and 2019-11 is a really good read if you've got software and you don't know what it is. So it classifies it as medical device or IVD, and it classifies it to see whether it's a medical device or not, and it's a really good read if you're into software. So I'm going to use software now to look at product classification and use it as an example. So first of all, a heart rate monitor. I've got a Garmin watch I'm using for timing at the moment. This has a heart rate monitor on it, and I measure my heart rate fairly regularly. Well, it measures it all the time, continuously. That Garmin watch is not a medical device. If the Garmin watch had an ECG facility, then that would make that watch a medical device. And the difference is the difference between wellness and medical information. So heart rate is generally considered how healthy you are, as opposed to ECG, which the only reason you'd read an ECG is you're looking for problems with the heart and the way it functions. If we look at the app Calm, which is a meditation app, it can improve your mood. Okay, and so if you're depressed, you use Calm. Does that make Calm a medical device? Well, it could be if Calm promoted itself for that, but it's probably not. What about an app designed to observe depression and then link that information to a clinician for monitoring? So first of all, if it observes depression, is it a medical device? And secondly, if it sends information, does that make it a medical device? And how do you determine that? In order to understand that, you have to think about the classification of medical devices. Now, from the definition, you found that software was included in the list. So software is a medical device. Now, going from the bottom to the top, it goes from the lowest risk to the highest risk on this table. And on the left, or the middle one of the columns, the medical device directive, the rules can be found in Annex 9. And there are 6 rules, 6 classification levels across 18 rules. Now, this is the old CE marking classification. It is the future UKCA marking classification, as I'll come to. For future in Europe, we've now got the MDR, and in Annex 8 of the MDR, we've got now 7 rules because we've slotted in a class 1 reusable, and there are 22 rules in total. Anything above class 1 needs a notified body or a UK approved body to release some aspect of that device onto the market. If you're a class 1, you can self-declare. So it's really important to know if you're a class 1, because it might save you tens of thousands of pounds getting to market. This is where you go. So this is Annex 8, sorry, of the MDR. And there are 22 rules. I won't go into detail in all of them, but I've got I can make these into a PDF and circulate to anyone that wants them. And the other rules are below, but you can go to Annex 8 of the MDR. There's 4 colours because there are 4 sections. We've got non-invasive devices in green at the top. Underneath that in blue, invasive devices. You've then got active devices in orange, and then below them in blue are special rules. Now I'm going to zoom in now to active devices. An active device is anything that's powered. So anything that's electrically powered, and that includes software. Now, in the past, under the Medical Device Directive, software was only discussed 7 times in total throughout the whole of the directive. And the only rule you could pin software to was Rule 10. And what Rule 10 said is highlighted in yellow, and it says active devices intended for diagnosis are in Class 2A. So that meant that any software that didn't do diagnosis was Class 1 by default against Rule 12 of the MDD. The MDR, which is the orange text, now under Rule 10, it says active devices intended for diagnosis and monitoring. So if you've got some software and it does monitoring, then the minimum it's going to be is a Class 2A device. And then there's this new rule that's been slotted in, Rule 11, and this is specifically for software. And this says software intended to provide information which is used to take decisions with diagnosis or therapeutic purposes. That would be a Class 2A, or software intended to monitor physiological processes, Class 2A. All other software, Class 1. But there won't be a lot that is all other software because of the wideness of that definition. What that means is that you're a minimum Class 2A, and if you look in the top right of that section, it says if such decisions have an impact that may directly or indirectly cause the death or irreversible deterioration of the state of health, you're a Class 3 device. A deterioration in health or a surgical intervention, Class 2B. So from this, a lot of software has been up-classified to a higher classification. So going back to that definition, that question, what about an app that is being used to observe depression? Well, under the Medical Device Directive, if that has no diagnostic capability, it's a Class 1. If it's helping you to diagnose depression, then it's a Class 2A. Because of this new definition in the regulation, software intended to provide information which is used to take decisions with diagnosis or therapeutic purposes. Under the EU MDR, then software that was observing depression would be a Class 2A if it was being used for reviewing the depression. If it was being used to score the depression, then it would be a Class 2B. And if it was being used to adapt the treatment of that depression, it would be a Class 3. So you can see you need to understand exactly what the device does because it affects the classification. Just creating an app for depression or helping with the depression is not the end of the story. You need to understand exactly what you're doing. And so by knowing this sort of thing, these sorts of things, you can target a certain classification. You can say, oh, we're going to do this, but we're not going to do this. And that means we're going to stay in the Class 2A realm of the regulation. Now, if you think about IVDs, IVDs used to be classified as either a standard IVD, and that was like self-declared, and you didn't need notified body assessment, or you had an IVD which was for home use, or you had an IVD which matched the definition of List A and List B in Annex 2 of the IVD directive. Now, as you can see, there's not a lot of writing there, and this is copied and pasted out. In 1998, when the directive was launched, they thought this explained all the diagnostic devices in the world. But believe it or not, since 1998, more diagnostic devices have been invented and put on the market. And if they don't appear in this list, they get self-declared. And there are 80% of all diagnostic devices on the market in Europe that have been self-declared. Excuse me. Under the regulation, this is going to totally change, and you'll find that 90% of all IVDs will need a notified body before placing them on the market. You can see in the middle above A, specimen receptacles. So that blood tube is captured under Rule 5 and is captured under the IVDR, but it can be self-declared. But pretty much everything else you can think of, anything with a diagnostic capability is either going to be a B, a C, or a D, D being the highest risk. So go to Annex 8 of the IVDR, read the rules, start with Rule 1 and go to Rule 7 and see where your product sits, and that'll give you the classification of those IVDs. As I said, 80% of IVDs were allowed to be self-declared. In the future, 90% will have to have notified body oversight. This is going to happen from May this year. And for products that are already on the market, there is a transition period that's been announced. And that transition period goes from May all the way up, May 22, all the way up to May 25. And it depends on classification. The higher the class, the more likely you're going to need to have a notified body look at your technical file sooner. The lower classes, you've got until 2025. And there's a sort of other strange thing that's coming in with the IVDR, and that is laboratory developed tests, LDTs. Now, under the directive, they weren't really thought of and discussed, but under the regulation, they effectively become an IVD and are regulated under the IVDR. So if you work in a laboratory and you get cells and blood or samples from the body sent to you, you do analysis on that cell or that piece of part of the body, and then you send the information back to the patient or back to the clinician, then you're an LDT by definition. I think it's in Article 6 of the IVDR for distance testing. It's very poorly described in the directive, in the regulation, but anyone that's got a laboratory that is an LDT can remain on the market after May this year, but you must meet the requirements of the IVDR before a certain date, a transitional date, up to 2025. But any devices or any LDTs that are being placed on the market after May this year will have to meet the requirements of the IVDR in full. So you'll need a notified body. It will take you over a year just to get in the queue, to get in the queue and find your way to the notified body in order to submit a technical file for them. So there's an awful lot of sort of confusion and slowness in the market at the moment. What we just described there are the notified body classifications, or just the product classifications for UK and Europe. But do remember that the world is a big place, and where you're putting your product on the market might be completely different. And the regulations and the classifications of those regulations and the medical devices are different everywhere you go. So let's look at the Brexit effect. We have to understand where all the regulations and directives have come from in order to do this job properly. So the Active Implantable Medical Device Directive was launched in 1990. That's what the 90 means in its number. And that ran until May last year. The Medical Device Regulation was in 93, and that ran until May last year. And then those two have been combined into the MDR. The In Vitro Diagnostic Directive was launched in 98, and that will run until May this year. And in 4 years after the IVD directive was launched, the UK government got together and said, okay, the UK is part of Europe, and therefore we have to meet the requirements of the directives in Europe. And so over 100 pages, that's what it said. And I didn't even know this document existed until about 2019. And that ran until January 2020. Now in January 2021, in May 2021, the MDR came out, and the IVDR will come out later this year. So what this means is there is a gap in time from January 21 to May 21. And what that means is the UK legislation is based on the directives, and then from May last year, Europe has moved on to the regulations. If you're putting products on the market in the UK, at the moment you can have a UK CA mark on it or a CE mark, but from July the 1st, 2023, it must have a UK CA mark on it by law. And a UK CA mark is not recognised in Europe. So you have to have, if you're going to go into the UK and Europe, you have to have a UK CA mark and a CE mark, and you can put both on the packaging. So if we go back to that previous slide, section 3 slide, if you've got an app that observes depression that doesn't do diagnosis, in the UK currently, that's a class 1 device. But in Europe, it's a class 3 device if it's treating the depression. Sorry, it's adapting the treatment for depression. So you could be in Dover and Calais and have completely different experiences with your device. So it's a really important thing. Now, I've only learned this today, actually, the news flash. So I believe that the UK MDR is being rewritten currently, and I think it will be published at the end of this month. And as a draft document, and then 2 months later it should be live, I think. But don't quote me on that, but that's the latest information I have on it. and I thought I'd share it as part of this presentation. So I want to talk now about design control. Just looking at the time, I'm going to whiz through this pretty quick. Try and do the next two sections in 10 minutes. So you're probably listening to this presentation or watching the presentation because you've either identified a clinical need that needs for a known technology. Sorry, you've identified a clinical need for a known technology, or you've invented a new technology for a known clinical need. And then you thought you might go really fast to market, and at some point you think, right, I'll do that regulatory stuff later on. But in fact, the world doesn't work like that. And I would split the regulatory pathway up into three distinct groups. Develop the conceptual design to meet the clinical need, verification and validation, and then placing the product on the market. So I'm going to go through this. There are 10 sections to this because there are 10 TRLs. The TRL stands for technology readiness level, and it's a way of breaking up the development process into clear chunks. First of all, you've got to prove market and make sure there is a market out there. Talk to clinicians, talk to patients, work out what they want. Then go into TRL2, and the iiCON grant program do a brilliant job with this, and they'll give people £20,000 to £30,000 to go fly around the world and talk to people, everybody they can think of, to about their invention. And that's regulatory people like myself, it's IP specialists, molding companies, electronic engineers, software engineers, clinicians, patients, nurses, anyone that's going to use the device. And once they've done that, then they start building the device. They don't rush straight to build the device. And it's at TRL3 where they should be thinking for the first time, documenting what the user requirements are, the design inputs, and formulating what the risks are. Once you've done that, you can then design the risks out of the product. And through this process, you come up with a product which actually functions as it should do. And in TRL4, you should probably have something that looks like it's going to go on the market, but it's not the validated product. So TRL5, you validate a manufacturing environment, you validate software properly against 62304, the ISO standard, the IEC standard. You do functional analytical performance testing to make sure the device works, and then you do a design freeze, and that's really important. You would then do biological safety testing or data security testing, before then doing clinical assessment. Now, I'm not saying you wouldn't assess the biocompatibility of the device, and you wouldn't do user studies and some clinical studies in TRL 3 and 4. That's essential. But what I'm saying is that after you've got your validated manufacturing process set up, or your validated software, you need to then document your biocompatibility or electrical safety and your clinical testing on the validated thing, because then that proves that the thing you're going to place on the market actually works. Then you can put your technical file together with all the information you've gathered and get your CE mark. And then before you launch, you've got to plan for launch. So you've got to plan post-market surveillance, plan post-market clinical follow-up, plan for customer complaints. And then once you're in the market and you've launched the device, you've got to do all the things that you had planned to do. Excuse me. Companies that don't do TRLs 1 to 3 very well, I see that quite commonly. People think that they're in TRL 5 when actually they're in TRL 4, because they get very clear distinction in their mind of exactly what the model's going to look like. They go rush and make it, and then they end up trying to do validation on something they haven't properly worked out. If you don't do TRL 3 and 4 very well, then the product falls over in clinical assessment and safety assessment. And if you haven't really worked out what the customer wants and how it will be used in the market, then clinical performance will fall over. And you'll spend a lot of time in verification and validation, not getting very far. And if you're unlucky, you might run out of money, and then the whole thing falls over. So in order to prevent that, I've developed a design workshop, which I run with startup businesses and universities in this TRL 3/4 area. I support companies through the verification and validation with more tools and more coaching, and then the stuff that you need to do before you launch. At some point through this process, the companies will gain ISO 13485. It's not essential they gain it before they launch, they can get it afterwards, but it's very common, and I would stress you probably want it by TRL 5. And all of this information that supports the product development will help you exit your product or your university or whatever. And it may not be all at the same place. So having this information, this documented information, will help add value to your business, add value to your concept, your technology, and it's all done for the right reasons. It all looks quite complex, but it comes down to, when you boil it down, it comes down to two things: design inputs and design outputs. So your user requirements, your design inputs, your safety risk assessment, your inputs, product design, the actual models and specifications, and verification validation are design outputs. So I'm going to rattle through now very quickly 13485. What's the purpose of a quality management system? Well, in a very succinct way, it's ensuring that you've got conformity and consistency of product. So imagine you build something and you test its specification and it works. You then hand it over to manufacture and they make multiple devices. Each one of those devices has to meet the specification of the original product. And then if you make batch after batch after batch with multiple devices in each one, each device has to meet the original specifications. Once you're on the market, you have to do post-market surveillance, and all of this, from design development, post-market surveillance, customer complaints, it all requires, it all generates loads of records, and all those records need to be housed and controlled in some way, and it's your quality management system that does that. It's also a requirement of every regulation that I've ever read around the world. So because it's written in the regulations, having a quality management system is a legal requirement. And there is an ISO standard that tells you how to write a quality management system. It's called ISO 13485. It has 8 clauses, but you can ignore clauses 1 to 3. I'm going to concentrate on clause 7 just to demonstrate what the document looks like. It says the organisation shall document procedures for design and development. So on the right of the screen there is my design and development SOP. It's a big beast of a document, but it describes the whole process from TRL 1 to TRL, the last TRL. My brain's gone dead. You've got to do design and development planning. You've got to do do design and development inputs. You've got to document design and development inputs and design and development outputs. You are required to do design review at all stages through the development process. You've got to do verification and validation, and it goes into detail what it means by verification and validation. And you've got to do transfer to manufacture. So you've got to have a body of work that documents the equipment, the training, the manufacturing procedures, so that that's what determines you're going to make the same device every time. And you've got to hand that over. Now, you will do it in TRL 5, but I recommend working with manufacturing in TRL 3 and 4 so that the product is designed for manufacture. Software is not really mentioned as part of the standard, but it still is a requirement of the standard. You still have to have a handover process, whether that's a handover from TRL 4 to TRL 5 to fully validated software, or whether it's a handover to the end user, but you've got to decide and it's got to be documented in your system. Control of design and development changes is something you need to do, and that's done throughout all the different TRLs, particularly design freeze, and then later in TRL 8, when you're looking at the pulling the technical file together, you will then look at see if there's any changes between the design freeze and where you are now to see if you need to revalidate anything. You've got to pull together a technical file, and you have to record the design and development changes throughout the whole system. Now, what I've just described there is section 7.3 of the standard, and as you can see, it's quite a small section compared to everything that you need to do. The standard says all the way through it, the organisation shall document procedures for, and the word shall means must, so you must document procedures, and every number on this screen now is a clause that says you must create a document. But don't worry, this is at launch. When you're at early stage development, you only need a handful of procedures to support what you're doing, and build in more procedures as you go along. And that's it. So I've nearly made it on time. I wanted to finish by 5 to at least, maybe 10 to. So I'm going to hand back now to.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you.
That was brilliant. I'll let you dive off straight to your next session, and I'll take over from here.
I've jumped off. Yeah, you got that?
Yeah, yeah,
Brilliant
brilliant.
stuff. That is excellent. Thank you very much. Anybody's got questions, they can come back to me on email, as I said hundreds of times, and I'll leave you now and I'll disappear off to Manchester.
Okay, thank you ever so much, Richard. That's fantastic.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
So I think we can all take a bit of a breath now. That's an awful lot of information, isn't it? I don't know if I feel quite overwhelmed. I'm really glad that we're recording it. I think it's something that we'll certainly can revisit at some point. There's so much information to take in there. My comment is really, if there's anything that you've seen in that session that you'd like to drill in more into that information and you think it's worth us, I mean, we're up for doing more sessions, so please do put it in the chat, contact me, say it'd be great if we could do a session on this particular aspect and we can get Richard back again, or we can look at that in more detail. Please do put your questions in the chat or directly to Richard and we'll get those answered. But I think the complexity of that session demonstrates the need for the funding call that Nicola is going to talk about next. I think that's really, it shows that companies probably do need a bit of support in navigating that regulatory landscape, and Innovate have got a call out at the moment that Nicola is going to tell you much more about, and how you can access that. Do you want to share your screen, Nicola?
Yep. There we go.
That's great. I'll hand over to you then, Nicola. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Right. Good afternoon, everyone. So, my name's Nicola Broughton. I work for CPI. So, if you haven't heard of us, we are part of the UK High Value Manufacturing Catapult. It's one of the founding members, and that's a collection of organisations that have been brought together to support the growth and development of the UK economy by helping translate bright ideas and research into the marketplace. And as we operate within this, we bring together academia, businesses, government and investors as the whole network that we can access and bring together to help mutually support and benefit the UK industry. Underpinning this is our own work to help companies develop, prove, scale up and commercialise new products and processes. As a not-for-profit, we exist only to help companies with their innovation challenges, enabling them to take their products and processes to market quicker and more cost effectively. And if our customers succeed, then we've achieved our goals of creating a healthier society, a cleaner environment and a more vibrant UK economy. Specifically within the medical device development, we obviously have certain technical capabilities, and we're involved in technology development, helping to move products through the different TRLs that Rich talked about, from concept to adoption in the market. And we've got a diverse range of capabilities, including incorporating new materials, design for manufacture, electronic integration and different technology testing. But what I wanted to focus on today is a support program that's been launched, and I think Rich has probably gone through this in far more detail than I've got on this slide. But basically, obviously, health tech is a really important sector, a market sector, and also there is a lot of engagement with the European Union by UK SMEs operating in this space. And as we've seen, there's lots of changes in regulation. They're complex, confusing in some cases. And for small companies that don't have an in-house consultant or team telling them exactly what they need to do to navigate the requirements, that's quite a burden. So CPI and ABHI are working on behalf of Innovate UK to deliver the Health Technology Regulation and Innovation Programme, to help support this regulatory transition and understand what are the challenges that industry are currently facing. So there's kind of 5 different points to this project. So the first one, which probably will be of most interest to people, is some funding support. And I'll come back to that in more detail shortly. But essentially, it's a 6.39 million competitive funding scheme that's being delivered by CPI. And UK SMEs that are either developing or currently selling medical devices are able to apply for up to £30,000 to fund regulatory advice. For those who are perhaps not currently engaged in with a regulatory advisor or not looking to in the immediate future, we're also offering some training. So we're looking at ABHI, who will deliver a series of webinars around all the different changing regulations. So I think we're probably looking at around 9 or 10 different sessions focusing on a whole range of different topics, but they may include product classification, your quality management, and assessment, and the need for clinical evidence. We're also looking at producing 3 different reports. So the first one is a roadmap for in vitro diagnostic development. So understanding what technology and capability will need to be developed to advance this industry, and it's to help industry plan their innovations and also for the UK government to instigate the right technology and capability funding calls in the future. ABHI are also conducting a series of workshops and roundtables to help understand the challenges faced by the UK industry, particularly in the regulatory environment, but also things like the supply chain and other challenges in bringing the products to market. And CPI will also be leading on an insight report. So that's going to bring together all the engagements that we have across the whole of the programme. We're going to be putting out some surveys and collecting the different contributions to gain insights into the innovation challenges, but also other things not necessarily directly regulatory, such as sustainability, access to funding, that perhaps act as a barrier to SMEs wanting to take products to market. So just a little bit more information about the funding support. So as I mentioned, there's up to 30,000 per SME available. Applicants must be UK-based SMEs and they must be an SME. And that grant must be spent with a nominated UK-based regulatory provider, unless a strong justification is given for why you would need to use a non-UK provider. So for example, if you're going for FDA approval, then obviously you may wish to use a provider based in America. The key caveat to this is that the support must be complete by the end of August. So the invoices that we would look to reimburse must be sent through to CPI before the end of August this year. Some people have asked me, did I mean 2023? No, it is 2022. There is a preference for IVD and for companies currently with products on the market for the reasons that Rich identified there, as obviously there's been a huge change in the regulations, and at the moment companies are at risk of having to withdraw their products from the market. And we do ask that as a condition of receiving this funding that applicants complete a survey, because obviously there's an awful lot of issues and complexity that we're looking to understand, and we want to be able to help inform future government decision making and what support is available to this sector. And there's just a timeline there. So this competition is currently open. It's set to close at the 31st of May. But I would highlight that we're reviewing applications on a first come first served basis, provided, and funding will be granted provided that a minimum threshold is met. And just as some examples of what we would fund, they're shown on this slide here. I won't go through them all. So if you've got any questions about what may or may not be funded, the first point of call I'd recommend is our website, and the URL is shown on screen there. So that outlines the scope, the eligibility, how the programme works. And there's also a support inbox, so health.tech programme at uk-cpi.com. And if you've got any queries that where the information isn't available on the website, the team would be happy to help you. So thank you very much, and I will hand back to Lisa.
Thank you, Nicola. That's really welcome. Has anybody in the audience got any particular questions on the funding call while Nicola's online? Because we do have time to answer those. If you've got any, please do put them in the chat. I've just got one question. and that is, how easy is it to apply? What's the application form? It's not like a smart award or something, is it?
Yeah, we absolutely recognise that we didn't want to be yet another blocker in the process. So there is an application form which is accessed through the website. It's designed to be light touch. There are quite a few questions, but some of those are, you know, what is your name? What is your company's name? Unfortunately, the applications can't be saved. So it is, we have put up on the website a list of the questions you're going to be asked, and we recommend you just prepare your answers ahead of time and then just copy them into the form. But no, it's most certainly not as long as you know, some of the Innovate UK Smart Grant awards. It's not 10 questions, 400 words each.
And are you able to give any indication of, you said it's already open and some might have been awarded already. Have you been quite inundated, or?
There has been a number of applications, yes, and we're just now starting to. We've contacted the first batch of successful applicants. It does take us a few weeks to go through, so we have a panel of reviewers that look through what's been submitted, and obviously we also have to conduct our own checks for due diligence and so on. But although the competition closes at the end of May, we are reviewing them as they come in and trying to let people know as soon as possible, because we appreciate it's quite a tight deadline to get everything completed by the end of August.
That's great. Thank you, Nicola. I can't see any questions in the chat, but yeah, we'll circulate your details with the slides.
Thank you.
To the event today, so people can get in touch directly. Thank you ever so much.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to talk now about a new initiative. Just let me share my screen. First of all, let me put it on slideshow. And share this one. No, sorry for failing. Let me start again. That's the one you want to see. So I'm going to be talking about a new initiative called iiDiagnostics. I'm going to give you a little bit of context, a bit of background as to how we've arrived at this point, and then talk about the services that are going to be offered and how you can engage with iiDiagnostics. So let me move the slides on if I can. There we are. So you might have seen this press release. It was just released just Tuesday this week to announce that Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine has launched a spin-out called iiDiagnostics to support industry academic co-innovation. So it's all about enabling industry engagement and improved commercial access with our world-leading diagnostics R&D capability. So what I really want to give the context that, you know, our capability is not new. We've got a long history of working with industry and with working in diagnostics. So we've got a long track record of investment in diagnostic technologies, historically focused just on antimicrobial resistance and tropical diseases, but obviously that enabled us to respond to the needs during the COVID pandemic. So really we found that there was quite a high demand for our category 2 and 3 laboratories, our ability to handle the live virus, our collection of patient samples, sensitivity panels, etc., etc. So we're able to support companies in performing testing and validation of their kits. So we've been central to the validation of a number of different antibody and antigen tests, and I can talk in a bit more detail about some of those. So this is one case study. We're very proud of our relationship with Melogic. So we started speaking to Melogic back in 2019, and believe it or not, we actually developed a project about epidemic preparedness back in 2019, but the funders didn't foresee what was going to happen, and actually we were unsuccessful in that funding. But that meant we were in a really strong position to respond to the call for COVID projects in early 2020 when it was an epidemic in Wuhan. And Mologic led an application to the Wellcome Trust, which was successful. You'll see at the top there, this news article was published on the 12th of March. That's just a day after the UK government announced the lockdown in the UK. So we were very early in securing funding to support Mologic's development and validation of their test. So we worked really hard throughout 2020, and we continue to work with Mologic now, but our data in the validation of the different prototypes enabled Mologic to get their product to market, and it's actually been procured by finding a unit aid program to be rolled out across Africa. So we're delighted to see that, because that very much is in line with Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine's mission of affecting sort of global health issues. So during that time in 2020, FIND, the Foundation for Innovative Novel Diagnostics, based in Geneva, chose Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine as the UK evaluation site for antibody and antigen rapid tests. So we're the only site in the UK that's evaluating on behalf of FIND. So what happens is companies submit their tests to FIND for this independent evaluation. They're then sent off to these different sites around the world. The sites provide the data back to FIND. That's published on their websites. That's openly available for people to access. And the World Health Organization uses that data to inform its procurement decision making. So that started in 2020. We're now into the third year of being FIND's UK evaluation site. So these two case studies are in the public domain. I can talk about those. So we work with the local company called Mass Group. We've worked with them historically in the past. They're great friends of ours. We're able to evaluate their LAMP-based SARS-CoV-2 kit and sort of match it against another market leader and demonstrate performance for them. We also worked back in 2020 with Excalibur, and we were able to use clinical samples to evaluate their test, and that was used for their submission pack for MHRA and led to MHR accreditation. So they're just two examples of many companies we've worked with at various stages in the development and evaluation, but we have supported it, companies in getting regulatory approval. So the collection of clinical samples for the FIND study happens under the Falcon initiative, and this is led by Manchester University Foundation Trust. So the team have worked tirelessly in attending the airport drive-through site, the government site, and recruiting volunteers to give extra swab samples, which we then use to evaluate these tests and compare to standard PCR tests. So obviously we're faced now with the conundrum of people using the PCR test less and the government scaling back on those initiatives. So we're actively looking at securing additional clinical samples via other routes as we continue to see COVID as it's endemic. So looking to the future, there seems to be more of a reliance on the lateral flow. I think from personal experience, we're all used to using the lateral flow to evaluate COVID status on an ongoing basis. PCR is the gold standard. It is more accurate. It can detect the virus over a longer period. So companies have not stopped innovating in the COVID space. That's really interesting. They're looking for novel approaches, improved sensitivities with more of a lateral flow format. So we're seeing companies that are maybe looking to have sort of a point of care molecular approach, or maybe looking at multiplexing, so not just detecting COVID, looking at other respiratory diseases. So we're supporting companies in developing and evaluating those formats. So that's a bit of a background as to why we've reached this position. So over the last 2 years now during the pandemic, there has been a huge demand for the service offering in the diagnostic space. So we've made the decision to form this commercial organisation that can more quickly respond to the market needs and provide those services to our partners. So iiDiagnostics being established. It's all about enhancing the discovery and delivery of new innovative diagnostics that will ease the global burden of disease. So as I mentioned before, that really does align with Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine's mission. As you can see from the schematic there, there's 3 components to iiDiagnostics, and I'll go into a bit more detail about each of those. So one of them is a sensor technology, and within the iiDiagnostics setup, we intend to assemble, market and distribute an innovative new sensor. I'll give you the background to that in a moment. The centre element there of diagnostics is what, I've described the historical perspective of that, where we've got real expertise in antibody, antigen, molecular tests, and we're making that freely available to companies to come in and use as and when they need. And the third component is the Liverpool Insect Testing Establishment. Now that might not be widely known to everybody, but we've got a long history of working in tropical diseases, and we really are world leading in our work on mosquitoes. And we have colonies that enable us to test new insecticides or insect repellent products for commercial partners. So to go into a bit more detail about each of those elements. So this is our sensor device. I was reflecting during Richard's talk actually about whether it's a medical device or not. It isn't, because it's not actually diagnosing a disease, but it looks like a medical device. It's a high-tech piece of equipment. So most people are familiar with bed nets as a means to control malaria. But in addition to that, in malaria and endemic countries, another control measure is indoor residual spraying. So insecticide is sprayed on the surface of people's homes to kill the mosquitoes and in turn control the spread of malaria. Now, it's very important to understand from a quality control perspective, is that spraying, uniform? Are we spraying enough insecticide? And equally important is, are we spraying too much? We don't want to waste insecticide and then reduce the number of homes we can cover over geographical location. So Liverpool, we partnered with Liverpool John Moores, their expertise in sensor development. They developed a sensor that's able to detect the insecticide on the surface. So it looks a bit like a torch. This device is pressed against a wall, and it's through some sort of light emission process, it's able to detect the insecticide on the surface and give a sort of traffic light response, red, amber, green, as to the quality of the spraying. Now you also see there 4D products. I mentioned the local company. So originally Liverpool John Moores developed the first prototype via 3D printing. 4D products were then able to adjust the design to make it suitable for scaling up when we do get into that manufacturing stage, via injection molding, etc., etc. So it's been redesigned by 4D products, and it's just going out to India this week to undertake a trial. Assuming that trial is successful, we will then go into the phase of manufacturing these devices for wider geographical rollout to really help in the mission to combat malaria. So back to the diagnostics element, I gave you the journey and what we've been doing historically. This is a summary. There's an awful lot of information here, but it just gives you a bit of a sense of the breadth and depth that's within the team, the kind of activity that they can work with you on. So you can really tap into the knowledge within the team right at the beginning. In the assay development phase, you can talk to the team about appropriate targets, potentially about accessing focus groups, about maybe novel molecular targets to go for. So we can get involved in that very early assay design right the way through to potentially clinical trials and everything in between. So just to emphasize that we do have expertise across a number of different platforms. So whether that's molecular, qPCR, LAMP-based approaches, or your lateral flow, or antigen or proteomics, we also have sequencing expertise within the team. So there's a wide expertise base there to tap into. As I've mentioned, we have been doing quite a lot of validation studies. I will go on to this in a bit more detail in a moment, but the likes of your limit of detection assays we can do. And we can do that because of our category 3 facilities that a lot of companies don't have access to and wouldn't choose to invest in because they're so expensive. So that means that we do have all of the variants of concern with regards to COVID. So we're keeping on top of that. So that enables us to carry out the limit of detection when companies want it for their regulatory approval, or they may wish to revisit it at a point where a new variant is circulating and wants to retest their assay to prove that it is still working effectively against the circulating variant. So obviously we're handling COVID, but our category 3 facilities enable us to handle all of vast variety of organisms. So that is of high demand to companies. Also, the last column there, we do have a biobank that could be made available to companies as and when. So really do come and speak to us and we can dive into more detail about how we can support you in your product development. So this may send shivers down some people's spines. This is the target product profile from MHRA. That's a recently updated version. So as we all aware from Richard's presentation, MHRA is the UK regulatory body, and they set the requirements or the benchmark that companies have to reach to be able to put their products on the market. So within the guidance for limit of detection for SARS-CoV-2, there's information there about the level that you have to achieve with regards to numbers of viral particles that the test has to detect. So we routinely carry out those kind of studies. As I mentioned, we've got all the variants of concern, and limit of detection studies are something we routinely do. It's become our bread and butter, and it's really supportive of companies' regulatory approval packs. In the same sort of data submission, companies have to submit analytical specificity. So your test is performing against COVID and you're getting a positive result as expected. You need to also check that you're not getting false positives by picking up other coronaviruses or other viruses or other bacteria. So we're able to have in-house all of these panels. They're able to do those cross-reactivity studies. And also the FDA, the US regulatory body, requires additional cross-reactivity studies. So if you've had a drink of coffee, does that affect the test? If you've been using throat lozenges, and the list goes on and on and on. So we can undertake those kind of studies on behalf of companies. So I think it's quite important that our submissions from Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine have already been accepted by the MHRA. So we're kind of an accepted and trusted independent evaluation site. So I think that's really important for companies to recognise. So on to the final component of iiDiagnostics. This is LIGHT, the Liverpool Insect Testing Establishment. Now, this is an amazing facility that I'm sure most people are unaware exists. It's within the Accelerator building within Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine. So we have the largest collection of fully characterised insecticide-resistant mosquito populations in Europe. Each of those populations have been carefully collected by our researchers over time and maintained, sometimes over decades, within our facilities. So we are global leaders in research in insecticide resistant mechanisms. So that's something that's really valuable to companies to be able to tap into, and we're very much open to working with commercial organisations. We have done historically in the past, but iiDiagnostics will facilitate that interaction. So we do have great facilities. We have this bespoke laboratories with climate control testing. We often give visitors tours of that, and they really can experience the humidity that's required to raise those colonies of insects. We have specialized equipment that enables us to sort of in a quality controlled environment have surface treatment and spray treatment of surfaces to get that even coverage. We have wind tunnels for aerosol testing. And we also have a facility that allows us to record the mosquito flight. Now, this has been really important historically because that enabled us to design, and it's ultimately gone to market, and the next generation of insecticide bed nets. Because by monitoring the mosquito flight, we're able to demonstrate, that they congregate over a particular area, and that area we're then able to put a greater concentration of insecticide. So that next generation of net, as I've said, is now going out to market. An additional methodology is HPLC. That's used to be able to quantify the insecticide. So that's important. We have an awful lot of expertise in that area, and we have ability for genotyping and phenotyping characterization of our colonies. So I wanted to share this because I think it's a lovely picture that shows us rearing these new colonies. We have all of the different genera of mosquitoes on site, and those colonies are maintained under continued insecticide pressure to ensure that there is a consistent phenotype there. So if you're testing this year, it will be the same parameters as testing the year after. So here are a few case studies of us working with industry. So we've been able to, for a regulatory submission pack, we've been able to undertake testing of bed nets after washing. So it's a washing challenge. Does the bed net still perform in the same way after washing? So that was the first case study there. We're able to profile the insecticide resistance in different strains. And I think this is probably in quite high demand, is understanding the durability of formulations on surfaces over a period of time. So whether that is walls or whether that's skin for insect repellent formulations, we can undertake those kind of studies. So that's a bit of a rattle through the 3 different elements of iiDiagnostics. But if you were interested in engaging with us, I just want to give an overview of the process of how that would work. So in the first instance, recommend connecting with me, and I would bring in the lead academic for whatever area that you're interested in. And we'd set up a consultation with that experience group, and we'd really discuss your needs and what we might be able to do to help. So it's very much a consultative approach then. And then we'd determine the best approach to support you going forward. And usually that next step is we'd work with you to draw up the appropriate protocols to achieve your needs. So whether that is a limit of detection study or a sensitivity or a much longer study over a period of time. That protocol would enable us to provide a quotation for our services, so it's based on time and resources. And during that contracting phase, we'd agreed the timelines for delivery. We then get on with work and provide you with interim results if that's appropriate, if not a detailed report at the conclusion. And I've kind of demonstrated that as a linear process. It's more circular because quite often we find that companies at the point of achieving the results of one phase of work, we're then into discussions about the next phase, and it's a continuous iterative process of support there. So that's very much a fee-for-service model, but as we're now set up as a legal entity, as a company in our own right, we can consider collaborating on grant applications or even leading grant applications as a company. So that's one thing to consider. So that's it from me for the quick overview of iiDiagnostics. Those are my contact details if you do want more information, or please put any questions in the chat if we've got time now. We have got time, I can see. I think you'll all appreciate getting another half an hour back on of your life. But if you've got any questions, please put them in the chat. I'd welcome your feedback, really, particularly on the first session. if there is additional regulatory support that you feel you need, we can certainly consider delivering additional sessions, and please do keep in touch. But if there are no more questions in the chat, I think we can leave it for today, and just do keep in touch. We will circulate the slides from today and the link to the recording, and thank you ever so much for everyone joining today.